Rich man observes a homeless girl teaching his child. What she learned shocked him. If you're here for heartfelt moments and unexpected turns, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against Italian marble echoed through the empty conservatory. Max Whitmore paused mid-stride, his silver-streaked hair catching the afternoon light as another discordant screech pierced the silence from upstairs. His daughter's violin lesson was not going well. Again, Max adjusted his tailored charcoal suit jacket and exhaled slowly, watching steam rise from his untouched espresso. 3 months. 3 of the city's most prestigious violin instructors. $15,000 in lessons. And Emma still trembled every time she lifted the bow. The music stopped abruptly, followed by muffled voices and the soft thud of a violin case closing. Max glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 20 minutes early. Another session cut short. Footsteps descended the grand staircase. Emma appeared first, her chestnut curls disheveled, glasses sliding down her nose. Behind her, Professor Martinez followed, his expression carefully neutral as he adjusted his bow tie. Mr. Whitmore, the instructor began, his accent clipped with barely concealed frustration. Perhaps we should consider a break. Max's voice was steady, controlled. Emma needs consistency, not breaks. The child seems resistant to traditional methods. Emma's small fingers twisted the strap of her violin case, her eyes fixed on the marble beneath her feet. At 10 years old, she carried herself like someone perpetually apologizing for taking up space. "I'll find another instructor," Max said. "Someone who understands discipline." Professor Martinez nodded curtly, collected his payment, and left without another word. The door's soft click seemed to echo through the vast foyer. Emma remained motionless, shoulders hunched. Max approached slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "You want to walk in the garden?" he asked softly. She nodded without looking up. The private garden stretched across 2 acres behind the Whitmore estate, manicured hedges creating perfect geometric patterns around a central fountain. Max walked beside his daughter in comfortable silence, noting how she paused at every flower bed, touching petals with the same gentle precision she couldn't seem to find with her violin. Through the ornate iron gates that separated their property from the public park, voices drifted on the October breeze. Children's laughter mixed with the distant hum of city traffic. Max rarely paid attention to the world beyond his walls, but today something made him pause. A melody floated through the air, not perfect, but alive. Real. Raw in a way that stirred something he'd forgotten existed. Emma heard it too. Her head lifted, glasses catching the light as she turned toward the sound. "Papa," she whispered. "Can we look?" Max hesitated. The public park meant crowds, noise, chaos. Everything he'd built his life to avoid since Maria's death. But Emma's eyes held a spark he hadn't seen in months. Just for a moment. They approached the gates quietly. Through the wrought iron, Max could see a small crowd gathered around a weathered park bench. At the center sat a teenage girl, her dark skin glowing in the dappled sunlight, short natural hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked intentional. Her clothes, a faded hoodie with holes at the elbows, jeans with artistic tears at the knees, told one story. But her posture told another. She held a violin like it was an extension of her soul. "Now, Marcus," she was saying to a boy who couldn't have been older than 8. "Feel the rhythm in your chest first. Music doesn't start in your fingers, it starts in your heart." The homeless girl, because that's clearly what she was, Max realized with uncomfortable certainty, demonstrated a simple bow technique. Her instrument was battered, strings mismatched, bridge slightly askew. But when she played, the imperfections became part of the magic. "Don't worry about perfect," she continued, guiding the younger boy's bow hand. "Perfect is boring. Perfect doesn't make people feel anything." Emma pressed closer to the gates, her small hands gripping the iron bars. Max found himself doing the same, drawn by something he couldn't name. The girl noticed them then, her eyes meeting his through the gaps in the fence. For a moment, neither moved. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 16, but her gaze held depth that spoke of experiences far beyond her years. She smiled at Emma, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "You play?" she called out, nodding toward the violin case in Emma's hand. Emma shook her head quickly, stepping back. "Learning too," Max answered for her, surprised by his own voice. "Learning's the best part," the girl said. All the good stuff happens in the learning. She returned to her impromptu lesson, but Max couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just shifted somehow. The late afternoon sun cast longer shadows through the garden as they watched the girl work with a patience that no amount of money could buy. When the lesson ended and the small crowd dispersed, the girl remained on the bench, carefully cleaning her violin with a cloth that had seen better days. Emma hadn't moved from the gates. "Papa," she whispered, could I learn like that?" Max studied his daughter's face, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were bright with possibility instead of shrouded with dread. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. "We should go inside," he said finally. "Dinner's at 7. But as they walked back toward the house, Max found himself glancing over his shoulder, watching the homeless girl pack up her violin with the same careful precision he used for his most important business documents. Something about her haunted him, though he couldn't quite say what. The next afternoon, Max found himself returning to the garden earlier than usual. He told himself it was coincidence. He needed the fresh air, the space to think about the Henderson acquisition. But when he reached the gates and saw the girl wasn't there, disappointment settled in his chest like a stone. Emma appeared beside him 20 minutes later, violin case in hand. "No lesson today?" he asked. She shook her head. "Mrs. Peterson canceled. She said I need to practice fundamentals before we waste any more time on pieces." The dismissive tone in his daughter's voice, an echo of her instructor's words, made something twist in Max's stomach. When had Emma started talking about her music like a burden instead of a gift? "Want to sit for a while?" They settled onto the stone bench near the gates, watching joggers and dog walkers navigate the paths beyond. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke, autumn settling into the city like a familiar song. "Mr. Whitmore?" Max turned to find the homeless girl approaching the gates from the park side, violin case slung across her shoulder. Up close, he could see the careful way she'd mended the holes in her hoodie, the dignity she carried despite circumstances that should have broken someone her age. "I'm Nia," she said simply. "I saw you yesterday. Is this Emma?" His daughter nodded shyly. "Beautiful violin," Nia continued, gesturing to Emma's case. "May I?" Emma looked to Max, who found himself nodding despite every instinct screaming caution. They were separated by iron gates and 40 years of experience, but something about this girl felt safe. Emma opened her case, revealing an instrument that cost more than most people's cars. Nia whistled low. "Wow, that's a serious violin. You must be a serious player." "I'm not good," Emma said quickly. "Everyone says I need more practice." "Everyone says a lot of things," Nia replied. "What do you say?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I say, I love how it sounds when other people play. But when I try, it sounds like crying." "Maybe it is crying," Nia said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's sad because it can't show you how beautiful you are." Max felt something catch in his throat. In 3 months of expensive lessons, no instructor had ever spoken to Emma like this, like her feelings mattered more than her technique. "Can you show me?" Nia asked. Emma hesitated, then lifted her violin. Her posture was technically correct, back straight, feet positioned properly, bow grip exactly as she'd been taught. But her shoulders were rigid with tension, her breathing shallow with anxiety. She began a simple scale. Each note was precise, measured, lifeless. Max had heard it 100 times, always followed by corrections about intonation or timing or pressure. But Nia just listened, her head tilted slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When Emma finished, she lowered the violin immediately, waiting for judgment. "That was lovely," Nia said. "Very controlled. Very careful. But can I ask you something?" Emma nodded. "When you play like that, what are you thinking about?" "Not making mistakes," Emma answered immediately. "Ah." Nia nodded sagely. "That's the problem right there." She pulled out her own violin, the battered instrument that looked like it had survived a war. The contrast between the two violins, Emma's pristine perfection and Nia's beautiful imperfection, seemed to say everything about their respective approaches to music. "When I play," Nia said, "I think about how the music wants to feel. Not how it's supposed to sound, but how it wants to feel." She positioned her violin and began the same scale Emma had just played. The notes were identical, but everything else was different. Where Emma had been rigid, Nia was fluid. Where Emma had been careful, Nia was confident. Where Emma had been afraid, Nia was fearless. It was the same melody, but it was alive. Emma stared through the gates, transfixed. Max found himself equally captivated, though for different reasons. This girl, this homeless teenager with a broken violin, was teaching his daughter something that $15,000 in lessons hadn't even touched. See the difference? Nia asked when she finished. You weren't scared, Emma said softly. Nope. But you want to know a secret? I used to be terrified, shaking so hard I could barely hold the bow. Really? Really? But then someone taught me that mistakes aren't wrong. They're just detours. Sometimes the detour is prettier than the main road. Max watched his daughter absorb this philosophy, saw something shift in her expression. For the first time in months, Emma looked at her violin without dread. Could you? Emma began, then stopped, courage failing. Could I what, sweetie? Could you show me how to not be scared? Nia glanced at Max, a question in her eyes. He found himself nodding before he'd consciously made the decision. I'd be honored, Nia said. And so began the most unconventional music lessons of Emma's life. Over the next 2 weeks, Max's afternoon routine changed completely. Instead of returning directly to his home office after lunch meetings, he found himself drawn to the garden, to the iron gates where his daughter and the homeless girl met every day at 4 o'clock sharp. Nia never asked for payment. She never asked for anything at all. She simply appeared each afternoon with her violin and an endless supply of patience, teaching Emma things that couldn't be found in any conservatory textbook. Music is a conversation, Nia explained on the 3rd day, demonstrating call-and-response techniques. You say something, the violin says something back, but you have to listen to hear what it's telling you. How do you know what it's saying? Emma asked. Feel it in your body. Here, Nia placed her hand over her heart. The violin knows things your brain doesn't. Trust it. Max watched from his stone bench, ostensibly reading quarterly reports, but actually studying this unlikely teacher who was transforming his daughter day by day. Emma's shoulders had loosened. Her breathing had deepened. Most remarkably, she'd started smiling while she played. Your turn, Nia said on the 5th day. Play me something happy. I don't know any happy songs, Emma replied. Then make one up. Make one up. Emma's eyes widened. But that's not. I'm supposed to play real music. This is real music. It's your music. Play me the sound of sunshine. Emma looked uncertain, glancing at Max through the gates. He nodded encouragingly, though privately he wondered if this was getting too far from actual musical education. But when Emma lifted her violin and began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, Max understood what Nia had been working toward all along. The melody that emerged wasn't technically complex. It wouldn't impress Professor Martinez or any other classically trained instructor. But it was alive, joyful, uniquely Emma. It was the sound of sunshine. Beautiful, Nia exclaimed when Emma finished. That's what I'm talking about. That's your voice. Emma beamed, cheeks flushed with pride and exertion. Max felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of joy and regret that cut deeper than he expected. When had he stopped encouraging Emma to find her own voice and started demanding she perfect someone else's? Again, Emma said eagerly, I want to play it again. As the days passed, Max found himself looking forward to these afternoon sessions with an anticipation that surprised him. He began arranging his schedule around them, declining late meetings and moving phone calls to accommodate Emma's unconventional lessons. But more than that, he found himself genuinely curious about Nia. Where did she come from? How had someone so young developed such profound musical intuition? And what circumstances had led her to the streets? She sleeps in the park shelter, Emma mentioned casually on the 10th day as they walked back to the house. She told me, her violin is the only thing she owns that's really hers. The information hit Max like a physical blow. This girl who was giving his daughter the gift of musical confidence had nowhere to sleep except a city shelter. The contrast between Emma's privilege and Nia's circumstances should have felt abstract, but knowing Nia had made it intensely personal. That night, Max found himself unable to focus on work. He paced his home office, Maria's photograph watching from the desk as he wrestled with emotions he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. Admiration for Nia's skill and patience. But underneath those familiar feelings lurked something more uncomfortable, shame. He'd spent months throwing money at Emma's musical education, hiring the most expensive instructors, buying premium instruments, enrolling her in elite programs. None of it had worked. But a homeless teenager with a broken violin had unlocked something in his daughter that all his resources couldn't touch. What did that say about him? About his approach to parenting? About the values he was teaching Emma? The questions followed him to sleep and greeted him the next morning, adding weight to what should have been routine business decisions. When his assistant mentioned a charity gala fundraising for homeless youth services, Max found himself saying yes, without his usual careful consideration. Everything was connected now. Everything led back to the girl at the gates. On the 14th day, everything changed. Max arrived at the garden early, hoping to catch a few minutes alone with Nia before Emma's lesson began. He had questions about her background, her training, her plans. But more than that, he had a growing sense that simply watching wasn't enough anymore. She was already there, tuning her violin with the focused concentration of a surgeon preparing for operation. The afternoon light caught the careful mends in her hoodie, the worn patches on her jeans, the pride with which she carried herself despite having so little. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, noticing his approach. "You're early today. I wanted to talk to you," he said, gripping the iron gates between them. "About Emma." Something in his tone made her lower her violin, giving him her full attention. "She's made remarkable progress," he continued. "In 2 weeks, you've accomplished what months of professional instruction couldn't." "I'm grateful" doesn't seem like a strong enough word. Nia smiled, but there was wariness in her eyes. "Emma's special. She just needed someone to help her find her confidence." "I'd like to offer you something," Max said carefully. "Payment for your time. Or perhaps a more formal arrangement. Lessons at our house, regular schedule, proper compensation." "No." The word was quiet but absolute. Max blinked. "I'm sorry. I don't want payment," Nia said. "This isn't about money." "But surely you need." "I need Emma to love music," Nia interrupted. "I need her to discover who she is when she plays. That's worth more than anything you could pay me." The simple dignity of her response left Max momentarily speechless. Here was someone who had every reason to accept financial help, refusing it because accepting would somehow diminish what she was giving. "At least let me." "Mr. Whitmore." Nia's voice was gentle but firm. "I know you want to help, but some things aren't about helping. Some things are just about connection." Before Max could respond, Emma appeared at his side, violin case in hand and eyes bright with anticipation. "Nia, I've been practicing the Sunshine song. Want to hear?" "Always," Nia replied, her smile erasing the tension of the previous moment. But as Emma prepared to play, a new voice interrupted from the park side of the gates. "Excuse me. You can't be here." Max turned to see a uniformed park ranger approaching, his expression stern and official. Behind him stood a middle-aged woman in expensive activewear, her arms crossed and mouth set in disapproving lines. "I'm sorry," Nia said, lowering her violin. "You're conducting unauthorized lessons in a public park," the ranger continued. "We've received complaints about loitering, panhandling, potential safety concerns involving minors." Max felt heat rise in his chest. "She's not panhandling. She's teaching." "Are you with her, sir?" the ranger asked, clearly noting Max's expensive clothes and air of authority. "I." Max hesitated, caught between truth and social convention. Was he with her? They'd never even spoken directly until today. But Emma was learning from her, growing because of her, becoming herself through Nia's guidance. "She's teaching my daughter," he said finally. The woman in activewear stepped forward. "That's exactly the problem. This is a family park. We have standards to maintain." "Standards?" Emma's voice was small but clear. "Nia's the best teacher I've ever had. I'm sure she's very enthusiastic." The woman replied with barely concealed disdain. "But there are proper channels for music instruction, licensed professionals, background checks, insurance." Max watched Nia's face during this exchange, saw the way she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Not defensive, exactly, but proud, determined not to be diminished by assumptions about her worth. "I understand your concerns," Max said, his voice taking on the edge he reserved for difficult negotiations. "But this young woman is providing exceptional instruction to my daughter. She's not breaking any laws. The loitering ordinance," the ranger began, "doesn't apply to scheduled educational activities," Max finished. "I'm familiar with municipal codes." The ranger looked uncertain, glancing between Max's obvious wealth and authority and Nia's obvious poverty. The woman in activewear was less easily deterred. Educational activities require proper supervision, she insisted. Licensed instructors. This girl could be anyone. How do you know she's safe around children? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Max felt Emma tense beside him, saw Nia's hands tighten on her violin. 2 weeks of beautiful afternoons, of musical breakthrough and growing confidence, reduced to suspicion and judgment based on nothing but appearance. Because, Emma said suddenly, stepping closer to the gates, she makes me brave. The simple statement carried more weight than any credentials or background checks. Max felt pride swell in his chest, not just for Emma's courage in speaking up, but for the values she was demonstrating. She saw Nia's worth when adults could only see her circumstances. But the damage was done. The ranger was already writing in his citation book, and the woman in activewear was taking pictures with her phone, documenting the situation for whatever complaints she planned to file. I should go, Nia said quietly. I don't want to cause problems for Emma. You're not causing problems, Max replied firmly. They are. But Nia was already packing up her violin, her movements quick and practiced. This wasn't the first time she'd been asked to move along, Max realized. This was routine for her, as familiar as Emma's scale practice. Will you come tomorrow? Emma asked, pressing close to the gates. Nia glanced at the ranger, who was still writing. I don't know, sweetie. Maybe it's better if I stay away for a while. No. Emma's voice cracked with desperation. Please, I need you to teach me. The raw need in his daughter's plea made Max's decision for him. What if, he said slowly, the lessons weren't in the public park? Both Nia and Emma turned to look at him. What if they were on private property? My property. No ordinances, no complaints, no interference. Nia shook her head immediately. I can't. You can, Max interrupted. And you should. Emma needs what you're teaching her. More than that, she wants it. Please. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the confrontation. The ranger finished his citation and handed it to Nia, who accepted it with quiet dignity. The woman in activewear was already walking away, her duty done. But Emma remained pressed against the gates, and Nia stood on the other side, both of them looking to Max for answers he wasn't sure he had. Think about it, he said finally. That's all I ask. That evening, Max found himself in Emma's room for the first time in weeks, really in it, not just standing in the doorway checking that she was settled for the night. She sat at her small desk, homework spread across the surface, but her violin case lay open beside her bed like a promise. Will Nia come tomorrow? Emma asked without looking up from her math worksheet. I don't know, Max answered honestly. She's proud. It might be hard for her to accept help. She helped me. That's different. Emma finally turned to face him, her glasses catching the lamplight. Why is it different? The question was simple. The answer was not. Because. Max started, then stopped. Because society taught them that wealthy people gave help and poor people received it? Because crossing those lines threatened the comfortable order of things? Because admitting that a homeless teenager had something valuable to offer his daughter meant admitting his money couldn't buy everything Emma needed? Because people have pride, he said finally. You mean she's embarrassed? Not embarrassed. But accepting help can feel like admitting you need it. That's hard for some people. Emma considered this, chewing on the end of her pencil in a gesture that reminded Max painfully of Maria. But everyone needs help sometimes, Emma said. You needed help when Mama died. I needed help learning violin. Nia needs help having a safe place to live. It's just different kinds of help. The clarity of his daughter's perspective left Max momentarily speechless. When had Emma become so wise? And when had he forgotten such fundamental truths about human connection? You're right, he said softly. Everyone needs help sometimes. So we should help Nia? If she'll let us. Emma nodded decisively and returned to her homework. But Max remained in the doorway, studying his daughter's confident posture, her focused expression, the way she hummed softly while she worked, a habit that had emerged only in the past 2 weeks. Nia had given Emma more than music lessons. She'd given her a sense of her own worth, her own voice, her own capability. The transformation was subtle but profound, touching everything from Emma's posture to her willingness to speak up in difficult situations. How did you repay a gift like that? And how did you honor it without diminishing it? The questions followed Max through a restless night and into the next morning's business meetings. He found himself distracted during important calls, checking his watch obsessively as 4 o'clock approached. Would Nia come? Would she accept his offer? Would Emma's musical awakening continue? Or would bureaucratic interference and social prejudice snuff it out before it could fully bloom? By 3:30, Max had abandoned all pretense of working. He stood in his garden, staring through the iron gates at the empty park bench where Nia usually sat. Emma appeared beside him at 10 minutes to 4, violin case in hand, her expression mixing hope and anxiety. 4 o'clock came and went. No Nia. 4:15. Still nothing. Maybe she's just running late, Emma said, but her voice was small. At 4:30, Max made a decision that surprised them both. Come on, he said, turning away from the gates. We're going to find her. The homeless shelter occupied a converted warehouse 6 blocks from the park, its brick facade softened by community gardens and children's murals. Max had driven past it countless times without really seeing it, the way wealthy people learn to make poverty invisible. But now, with Emma beside him and purpose driving them forward, the building seemed to materialize from nothing. Inside, the shelter buzzed with quiet activity. Families gathered around donated tables. Children did homework under fluorescent lights. Teenagers clustered near a gaming console. Volunteers ladled soup into paper bowls. The space was clean but tired, functional but not welcoming. Exactly what you'd expect from an institution stretched too thin. Can I help you? A woman approached them, her smile genuine but curious. Max and Emma clearly didn't belong in this world. We're looking for someone, Max said. A girl named Nia. 16, carries a violin. Recognition flickered across the woman's face. Nia Davis? She's not in trouble, is she? No. We're friends. The woman, her name tag read, Sarah, volunteer coordinator, studied them for a moment, then nodded toward a back corner where several teenagers sat around a battered upright piano. She's over there. But I should warn you, she's had a rough day. Max and Emma made their way across the room, drawing curious glances from residents and staff. They found Nia sitting slightly apart from the other teenagers, her violin case closed at her feet, her expression distant and shuttered. Nia? Emma's voice was tentative, uncertain. Nia looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Emma? What are you doing here? Looking for you, Emma said simply. You missed our lesson. I told you yesterday, maybe it's better if I stay away for a while. Max stepped forward. We came to ask you to reconsider my offer. Mr. Whitmore. Max, please. And I'm not talking about charity or pity or any of the things you think I'm talking about. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm talking about a job. Nia's eyes narrowed. A job? Emma needs a music teacher. A real one. Someone who understands that music comes from the heart, not from textbooks. Someone who can help her find her voice instead of forcing someone else's voice onto her. Max took a breath. You're that teacher. I'm not certified. I don't have a degree. I don't even have a permanent address. You have something more valuable than any of those things, Max replied. You have a gift for teaching, and Emma needs what you have to offer. He watched Nia wrestle with the proposal, pride and practicality warring in her expression. Around them, the shelter's evening routine continued, dinner being served, homework being completed, small dramas playing out among people just trying to survive another day. Why? Nia asked finally. Why is this so important to you? Max looked at Emma, then back at Nia. How to explain that watching his daughter discover joy in music had reminded him of everything he'd forgotten about parenting? How to describe the way Nia's patient teaching had shown him his own shortcomings without making him feel defensive or small? Because, he said finally, you see Emma. Really see her. Not what I want her to be or what her teachers expect her to be, but who she actually is. That's worth more than all the credentials in the world. Emma stepped closer to Nia, her small hand reaching through the space between them. Please, she whispered. I need you to teach me how to be brave. The simple plea seemed to break through Nia's defenses. Her shoulders softened, her expression gentled, her hand moved instinctively to cover Emma's. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try. The next 3 weeks transformed all their lives in ways Max hadn't anticipated. Nia arrived at the Whitmore estate each afternoon at 4 o'clock sharp, entering through the garden gates that Max had ordered unlocked permanently. She brought her battered violin, her infinite patience, and a teaching style that revolutionized Emma's entire approach to music. But more than that, she brought perspective. Why do you practice scales? She asked Emma during their second lesson in the garden. Because I'm supposed to, Emma answered automatically. But why are you supposed to? Emma looked confused. Because that's how you learn. That's how you train your fingers, Nia corrected. But learning music is different from training fingers. Learning music means understanding why each note exists, what it wants to say, how it connects to the note before and after. She demonstrated, playing a simple C major scale first mechanically, then with subtle variations in dynamics and phrasing that transformed it from exercise into expression. See? Same notes, different story. Your fingers play the notes, but your heart tells the story. Max watched these lessons from various vantage points around the garden, sometimes from the stone bench near the fountain, sometimes from the French doors leading to the conservatory, sometimes from his home office window. He told himself he was simply monitoring Emma's progress, ensuring the arrangement was working. But the truth was more complex. Watching Nia teach fascinated him. Her methods defied everything he understood about education. She never corrected mistakes directly, instead helping Emma discover problems and solutions through guided exploration. She never imposed interpretation, instead asking questions that helped Emma develop her own musical voice. She never used fear or pressure as motivation, instead nurturing confidence through small successes and gentle encouragement. Your daughter is remarkable, Nia said one afternoon when Emma had gone inside for water. She has such natural musical instinct. All she needed was permission to trust herself. She's never had that before, Max admitted. Permission to trust herself, I mean. I've always told her what to do, how to do it, when to do it, driven by what I thought was best for her. But you brought her to me, Nia pointed out. That took trusting her instincts too. The observation stayed with Max through dinner, through Emma's enthusiastic recounting of the day's lesson, through the evening routine that had become so much lighter since music stopped being a source of stress. He found himself examining not just his approach to Emma's education, but his entire philosophy of parenting. When had he started believing that love meant control, that protection meant limitation, that providing meant deciding? The questions led him to longer conversations with Nia, discussions that began with Emma's progress but expanded into broader territories. Her insights into child development, learning theory, and human motivation revealed an intelligence that formal education might have refined but could never have created. Where did you learn to teach like this? He asked one afternoon while Emma practiced independently. From being taught badly, Nia replied with a slight smile. Every mistake my teachers made, I promised myself I'd never make with someone else. Your teachers? Before. Her expression closed slightly, the way it always did when personal history came up. When I had teachers, Max wanted to press, but something in her tone warned against it. Instead, he filed the information away with all the other fragments he'd gathered about Nia's background. Hints of formal training, references to before, moments of pain that flickered across her features when she thought no one was watching. Whoever she had been before she was homeless, music had clearly been central to her identity. The question that haunted Max was what had happened to change that. Meanwhile, Emma bloomed. Her technical skills improved rapidly under Nia's guidance, but the real transformation was emotional. She held herself differently now, shoulders back, chin up, ready to meet challenges instead of cowering from them. She spoke more in general conversation, volunteered answers in other contexts, approached new situations with curiosity instead of anxiety. The change was most obvious during their traditional family dinner on Sunday evenings, a ritual Max had maintained since Maria's death as a way of preserving connection with Emma. Before Nia, these dinners had been quiet affairs, Emma answering his questions with minimal responses while they both struggled to fill the space Maria had once occupied with warmth and laughter. Now Emma chatted freely about her week, her music, her thoughts about everything from homework to philosophy. She asked questions, shared opinions, even disagreed with Max occasionally, something she'd never had the confidence to do before. Nia says disagreement isn't disrespectful if you're trying to understand each other better, Emma explained when Max commented on her newfound assertiveness. Another gift from their unlikely teacher, permission to have her own thoughts. As the weeks passed, Max found himself looking forward to Nia's daily arrival with an anticipation that went beyond watching Emma's progress. Conversations with her had become a highlight of his routine, their discussions ranging from music theory to child psychology to philosophy of education. She challenged his assumptions, offered perspectives he'd never considered, made him think more deeply about everything from business ethics to parenting priorities. He realized, with something like shock, that he was intellectually stimulated by a homeless teenager in ways he hadn't been by colleagues, peers, or social equals in years. The realization forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of his social circle, the narrowness of his worldview, the assumptions he'd made about worth and wisdom, and what it meant to be educated versus what it meant to be truly intelligent. But it wasn't until the third week that Max understood just how much Nia had been hiding from them. Emma was working on a piece by Bach, not because any instructor had assigned it, but because she'd fallen in love with the mathematical precision of the counterpoint. Nia was guiding her through a particularly challenging passage when her own violin slipped from her shoulder. The instrument hit the ground with a sickening crack. "Oh no," Emma gasped, immediately setting down her own violin to help. Nia knelt beside her fallen instrument, carefully examining the damage. The neck had separated partially from the body, strings hanging loose like broken promises. For someone who owned almost nothing, losing her violin was catastrophic. But it was Nia's reaction that stunned Max. Instead of despair or anger, she laughed, a sound so unexpected that Emma stepped back in surprise. "Well," Nia said, still chuckling, "that's one way to end a lesson." "But your violin," Emma whispered. "It's broken. It's been broken before. I'll find a way to fix it." Nia began carefully gathering the pieces, her movements gentle as if she were handling an injured bird. "These old instruments are tougher than they look." Max watched this display of grace under pressure with growing amazement. No dramatics, no blame, no self-pity, just acceptance and quiet determination to solve the problem. How many adults he knew would have handled such a loss with half her composure? "Let me replace it," he said impulsively. "No." The word was firm, but not harsh. "Thank you, but no. But you need an instrument to teach Emma. I'll figure something out." That evening, after Nia had left with her broken violin carefully wrapped in an old towel, Max found himself unable to focus on anything else. Emma picked at her dinner, worried about tomorrow's lesson, while he wrestled with the ethics of helping someone who didn't want to be helped. "She's proud," Emma observed quietly. "Yes, but pride doesn't fix violins." Max looked at his daughter, really looked at her. When had she developed such clarity about human nature? Such understanding of the complex relationship between dignity and practicality? "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." That night, Max made several phone calls. By morning, he had a plan. The next afternoon, Nia arrived without her violin. Max was waiting by the gates with Emma, both of them trying to look casual despite their obvious anticipation. "I have an idea," Max said before Nia could speak. "There's a violin in the conservatory that hasn't been played in years. It belonged to my late wife. Maybe it needs someone to bring it back to life." Nia's expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Whitmore." "Max. And it's not charity. It's practicality. Emma needs lessons, you need an instrument. It's sitting in there gathering dust while you're both missing out on music." He watched Nia consider this, pride warring with practicality exactly as Emma had predicted. Finally, she nodded. "I could borrow it. Until mine is repaired." "Of course." Max led them through the garden and into the conservatory, a sun-drenched room that had been Maria's favorite space in the house. Her violin waited in its case on the grand piano, exactly where she'd left it 3 years ago. Nia approached the instrument with reverence, lifting it from its case with the same careful precision she used for everything musical. It was a beautiful violin, not the most expensive in the world, but crafted with love and maintained with devotion. When Nia lifted it to her shoulder and drew the bow across the strings, the first notes seemed to wake the room itself. She played Maria's favorite piece, Pachelbel's Canon, and Max felt his breath catch. Not because the performance was technically perfect, though it was. Not because the violin sounded beautiful, though it did. But because for the first time since Maria's death, the conservatory felt alive again. Emma stood transfixed, watching Nia play with an expression of pure wonder. When the piece ended, silence held them all for a long moment. "It's beautiful," Nia whispered. "So is your playing," Max replied. Something passed between them then, an understanding that transcended their different circumstances and connected them through shared loss, shared hope, and shared recognition of music's power to heal. "Thank you," Nia said simply. "Thank you," Max replied. And Emma, wise beyond her years, began unpacking her own violin for what promised to be their best lesson yet. The final crisis came without warning on a Thursday afternoon in November. Max was in his office, reviewing contracts for the Henderson acquisition, when raised voices from the garden made him look up. Through the window, he could see Emma and Nia standing by the gates, but instead of their usual lesson setup, they were facing someone on the park side, someone whose body language screamed authority and aggression. Max moved quickly through the house and out to the garden, arriving in time to hear the tail end of a conversation that made his blood pressure spike. Inappropriate contact with a minor, a man in a cheap suit was saying, making notes on an official-looking clipboard. "We've received multiple complaints about unsupervised interactions, potential grooming behavior, safety concerns." "Excuse me," Max interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built his business empire. "Who are you?" The man looked up, taking in Max's expensive clothes and obvious wealth with the calculating eyes of a bureaucrat who knew which battles to pick. "Child Protective Services," he said. "We're investigating reports of inappropriate contact between this individual and your daughter." Max felt the world tilt slightly. CPS. Someone had called Child Protective Services on Nia. "What exactly are you investigating?" he asked carefully. "Unsupervised contact between a homeless individual and a minor. Potential safety risks. Questions about appropriate boundaries and supervision." Max glanced at Emma, who was pressed close to Nia's side, both of them looking terrified. Nia's hand rested protectively on Emma's shoulder, but she was careful not to move or speak in ways that might be misinterpreted. "This woman is my daughter's music teacher," Max said firmly. "Any contact has been supervised and appropriate. You're present for all interactions?" Max hesitated. The honest answer was no. He often worked in his office during lessons, trusting Emma and Nia to manage their time together. But admitting that now might make everything worse. "My property is secure," he said finally. "My daughter is safe. Nevertheless, we need to investigate. For the child's protection." The phrase hit Max like a slap. Everything they were doing, all the progress Emma had made, all the confidence she'd gained, all the joy music had brought back into their lives, reduced to a potential threat that needed investigation. On what grounds? Max demanded. Anonymous complaint. Alleged inappropriate relationship between a transient adult and a minor. "We have to take these things seriously." Max felt rage building in his chest, the kind of cold fury that had served him well in hostile business negotiations, but felt inadequate now. This wasn't about protecting Emma. This was about prejudice, about assumptions, about a system that saw Nia's poverty and homelessness as automatic disqualifiers for human decency. "The complaint is false," he said evenly. "Maybe, but we still need to investigate. Which means no further contact until we complete our review." "No." Emma's voice was high and sharp. "She's my teacher. She's helping me." The CPS worker looked at Emma with the kind of professional sympathy that somehow managed to be both genuine and condescending. "I understand this is upsetting, sweetheart, but we need to make sure you're safe." "I am safe. Nia would never hurt me." Max watched his daughter defend her teacher with fierce loyalty, saw Nia struggle to remain calm despite the obvious injustice of the situation, felt his own helplessness in the face of bureaucratic power that could destroy lives with paperwork and procedures. "How long?" he asked. "For the investigation?" "Could be weeks. Could be months, depending on our caseload and what we find." "Weeks or months?" Emma's recital was in 2 weeks, the performance she'd been preparing for with growing excitement and confidence. The first time she'd ever wanted to play in front of people instead of being terrified by the prospect. "There has to be something." "Mr. Whitmore." Nia spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the tears. Max could see her fighting back. "It's okay. It's not okay. It's reality." She looked at Emma, her expression infinitely gentle. "You keep practicing, okay? Keep playing your sunshine song. Keep being brave." Emma nodded, but tears were streaming down her face now. The CPS worker finished his notes and handed Max a card. "We'll be in touch." Meanwhile, no contact between the subject and the minor until further notice. He left without another word, taking with him any pretense that justice and fairness had anything to do with child protection. Max stood in his garden, watching Nia carefully pack Maria's violin, his violin now, he supposed, with the same reverence she'd shown from the first day. Emma clung to the iron gates as if she could hold on to their teacher through sheer force of will. "This isn't over," Max said. Nia smiled sadly. "Maybe it should be. Maybe this was always going to happen." "You don't believe that." "I believe that sometimes the world isn't fair. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to do good things." "You gave Emma something beautiful, Max. Don't let anyone take that away from her." She shouldered her violin case and walked away without looking back, leaving Max and Emma standing in their garden that suddenly felt like a prison. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Max's life. He hired lawyers, of course, called in favors, applied pressure, did everything his money and influence could accomplish. But bureaucracy moved at its own pace, and CPS investigations couldn't be rushed no matter how many powerful friends you had. Meanwhile, Emma retreated into herself. She still practiced violin, but mechanically, without joy. The confidence Nia had nurtured began to fade, replaced by the old anxiety and self-doubt. During dinner conversations, she answered questions with single words. At bedtime, she cried quietly into her pillow, thinking Max couldn't hear. He tried to help, but everything he offered felt inadequate. Other music teachers, private tutors, even a trip to Europe to hear the great orchestras. Nothing could replace what Emma had lost. "I don't want another teacher," Emma said when he suggested bringing in someone from the conservatory. "I want Nia." "I know, sweetheart. I'm working on it. She didn't do anything wrong." "I know that too." "Then why can't she come back?" Max had no answer that would satisfy a 10-year-old's sense of justice. How could he explain that the system designed to protect children sometimes hurt them instead? That prejudice masqueraded as policy? That fear of the different often trumped recognition of the good? The recital approached like an execution date. Emma had been preparing a piece for weeks. Not the box she'd been working on, but her own composition, a variation on the Sunshine song that had become her signature. She'd been excited about sharing it, proud of what she'd created, eager to show the world what Nia had taught her about finding her own voice. Now the recital felt like a cruel joke. "Maybe I shouldn't play," Emma said 3 days before the performance. "Why not? It won't be the same without Nia there." Max looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She was right, of course. The performance would be different without Nia's presence, without the teacher who had made it possible. But giving up would mean letting fear win, letting prejudice triumph, letting bureaucracy steal not just Nia, but Emma's own courage. "What would Nia want you to do?" he asked. Emma considered this seriously. "She'd want me to play, even if it's scary, especially if it's scary. She says brave isn't not being afraid. Brave is being afraid and doing it anyway." Max felt pride swell in his chest, not just for Emma's wisdom, but for the teacher who had given her that wisdom. Whatever happened with the investigation, whatever CPS ultimately decided, Nia had already given Emma something that could never be taken away, the knowledge that she was capable of courage. "Then you should play," he said. "Will you be there?" "I'll be in the front row." Emma nodded, decision made. But that night, Max heard her crying again, and he knew that courage and heartbreak could coexist in ways that broke his own heart. The recital was held in the community center attached to Emma's school, a modest venue that served the local music program. Max arrived early and took his seat in the front row as promised, watching other families file in with the kind of casual confidence that came from normal lives, uncomplicated by investigations and injustice. Emma appeared backstage, her small figure dwarfed by the concert dress they'd chosen together. She looked pale but determined, clutching her violin case like a lifeline. When she saw Max in the audience, she waved, and he waved back, hoping his smile conveyed more confidence than he felt. The program began with younger students playing simple pieces, their parents recording everything on phones and tablets. Max tried to focus on their performances, but his mind kept drifting to Emma's upcoming piece, to how different this evening might have been if Nia were here to offer last-minute encouragement and support. "Next, we have Emma Whitmore performing an original composition," the program director announced. Emma walked onto the small stage, her steps careful but steady. She positioned herself center stage, lifted her violin, and for a moment just stood there, bow poised but motionless. Max held his breath. Was she having second thoughts? Stage fright? Had the pressure of performing alone finally overwhelmed her newfound confidence? But then Emma spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "I wrote this song with my teacher," she said. She taught me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to share what's in your heart. She lifted her violin and began to play. The melody that emerged was Emma's Sunshine song, but transformed. What had started as a simple, joyful tune had evolved into something more complex, more nuanced. There were shadows now alongside the light, moments of uncertainty woven through the confidence. It was still beautiful, but it was honest, a musical reflection of everything Emma had experienced in recent weeks. Max watched his daughter play with growing amazement. This was not the terrified child who had trembled through scales just months ago. This was a young musician who understood that music could express the full range of human experience, that artistry came not from perfection but from authenticity. But as Emma approached the final section of her piece, something unexpected happened. She slowed, then stopped, her bow frozen above the strings. For a moment, silence filled the auditorium. Had she forgotten the ending? Lost her place? Max started to rise from his seat, ready to offer whatever support he could, when movement caught his eye from the side of the stage. A figure emerged from the wings, moving quickly but quietly toward Emma. It was Nia, carrying a violin, her face tight with concentration and determination. Max's heart hammered against his ribs. What was she doing here? The investigation was still ongoing, the restrictions still in place. If anyone reported this, if the CPS worker was in the audience, everything could get worse. But Emma's face lit up like sunrise when she saw her teacher. Without hesitation, Nia positioned herself beside Emma on the stage, lifted her violin, and nodded encouragingly. Together, they finished the piece. The duet that emerged was breathtaking. Emma's melody soared above Nia's harmonic foundation, the two instruments weaving together in perfect conversation. But more than the technical beauty was the emotional truth. Two people connected by music, by learning, by love that transcended circumstances and defied bureaucratic interference. When the last note faded, the auditorium erupted in applause. Parents who had been casually recording their own children's performances were now standing, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The other young musicians backstage crowded into the wings to see what was happening. But Max only had eyes for Emma, who was glowing with the kind of joy that made everything worthwhile. "Thank you," Emma said to Nia, her words barely audible above the applause. "Thank you," Nia replied, "for reminding me why music matters." As the applause continued, Max saw something that made his throat tighten. There were tears in Nia's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of pride, of fulfillment, of connection to something larger than herself. This was why she taught, not for money or recognition or even gratitude, but for moments like this, when music became a bridge between hearts, when courage triumphed over fear, when the act of sharing beauty made the world a little less broken. The program director approached the microphone, clearly moved by what had just happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we've all just witnessed something very special. Let's hear it one more time for Emma Whitmore and her teacher." The applause was thunderous, but Max barely heard it. He was already moving toward the stage, toward his daughter and the young woman who had transformed their lives, ready to face whatever consequences might come from this moment of perfect, rebellious beauty. Because some things were worth the risk, some connections were worth protecting, and some courage was worth celebrating, no matter what bureaucrats or investigations or prejudiced complaints might say. As Emma and Nia descended from the stage together, violin cases in hand and faces radiant with shared accomplishment, Max knew that whatever happened next, they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had refused to let fear silence the music. The aftermath moved quickly. Within an hour of the recital, Max's phone was buzzing with calls from his lawyers. Someone in the audience had indeed reported Nia's appearance to CPS, and the investigation was now considered compromised. There would be consequences, possibly charges for violating the contact restrictions, certainly complications for any future resolution. But as Max watched Emma and Nia discuss the evening's performance with animated joy, surrounded by other families who had been moved by their duet, he found he didn't care about the bureaucratic complications. "Mr. Whitmore?" A woman approached him, her expression curious rather than confrontational. "I'm Susan Martinez, the program director. I wanted to talk to you about what happened tonight." Max tensed, preparing for criticism or concern about the irregular appearance of an unauthorized teacher. Instead, Susan smiled. "That was extraordinary," she said. "I've been running these recitals for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." The connection between Emma and her teacher, the musical conversation they had, it was pure magic. "It was," Max agreed cautiously. "I understand there have been some complications with your teaching arrangement?" Max nodded, unsure how much to reveal. "Would you be interested in making it official?" Susan asked. "We're always looking for talented instructors for our community program. If Nia were interested, we could offer her a position, part-time to start, but with benefits, credentials support, even help with housing if she needs it." The offer hit Max like a revelation. An official position would give Nia legitimacy, protection, a pathway out of homelessness that preserved her dignity while acknowledging her extraordinary gifts. "I think she would be very interested," Max said carefully. "But there are some legal complications right now. Nothing that can't be worked through if there's institutional support," Susan replied. What happened tonight proved something important. Emma's teacher isn't just talented, she's transformative. We need more instructors like that. As if summoned by their conversation, Nia appeared at Max's side, Emma still glowing beside her. "Ms. Davis," Susan said warmly, "I have a proposition for you." 3 months later, Max stood in the same community center, but this time as an audience member for the spring concert featuring students from the new community music program. On stage, Nia conducted a small ensemble of young musicians, her movements confident and graceful as she guided them through a piece they had composed together. Emma was among the performers, no longer the terrified child who had trembled through scales, but a young musician who played with joy and confidence. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was permanent. Nia had given Emma something that went far beyond technical skill, the knowledge that she had a voice worth sharing. The CPS investigation had been quietly dropped once Nia gained official employment and stable housing. The complaints that had triggered it looked exactly like what they were: prejudiced assumptions masquerading as child protection. With institutional backing and legal support, the case dissolved into bureaucratic embarrassment that everyone preferred to forget. But the real victory wasn't legal or professional. It was personal. Nia now lived in a small apartment near the community center, her official salary supplemented by private lessons that included continued work with Emma. She had a home, stability, recognition for her gifts, and the chance to transform other young lives the way she had transformed Emma's. More than that, she had become part of Max and Emma's family in ways that defied easy categorization. Not a servant or employee, not quite a friend, but something deeper: a chosen sister, a surrogate aunt, a bridge between the world Emma had been born into and the larger world she was learning to navigate. As the concert ended and applause filled the community center, Max watched Nia acknowledge her students with the same gentle pride she had always shown. This was where she belonged, not on the streets or in shelters, but here, sharing her gifts, nurturing young talent, proving that worth had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with what you could give to others. Emma ran to Max after the performance, her violin case bouncing against her leg. "Did you hear us play?" she asked breathlessly. "Did you hear how the melody worked with the harmony?" Nia says when musicians really listen to each other, magic happens. "I heard," Max said, pulling his daughter into a hug. It was magical, and it was not just the music, but everything it represented: connection across difference, recognition of hidden worth, the triumph of human decency over bureaucratic prejudice. It was the sound of justice, finally, beautifully, undeniably in tune. As they walked toward the parking lot together, Max, Emma, and Nia, talking animatedly about the evening's performance and planning for next week's lessons, Max reflected on how much his definition of family had expanded over the past months. Money couldn't have bought what Nia had given them. Status couldn't have provided what her teaching had created. Privilege couldn't have replaced what her patience had nurtured. Sometimes the most valuable gifts came from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the best teachers were the ones society had written off. And sometimes love looked like a homeless teenager with a broken violin, offering music lessons to a privileged child through iron gates, creating magic one note at a time. The evening air was crisp with the promise of spring, and in the distance, The sound of young voices drifted from the community center as families gathered their belongings and prepared to head home. It was the sound of connection, of possibility, of a community enriched by recognizing talent wherever it flourished. Max smiled, thinking of Maria, knowing she would have loved Nia immediately, understanding instinctively what had taken him weeks to learn, that the most profound gifts often came wrapped in the most humble packages, and that the greatest teachers were those who saw not what their students were, but what they could become. As they reached the car, Emma turned back toward the community center, where lights spilled from the windows and the last families were emerging into the night. "Thank you," she called out to Nia. "For everything." "Thank you," Nia replied, her voice carrying the warmth that had first drawn them to her lessons by the park gates. "For letting me share the music." And in that exchange, simple, heartfelt, profound, lay the truth that had transformed all their lives. That teaching and learning were acts of love. That music was a language that transcended every barrier, and that sometimes the most beautiful harmonies emerged when people brave enough to listen found each other across the spaces that should have divided them. The story ended not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives changed for the better, connections forged across difference, and the knowledge that somewhere in the city, other young musicians were learning that courage and music were synonymous, that their voices mattered, and that the most extraordinary teachers sometimes came from the most ordinary places. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of three lives harmonizing in ways that would resonate far beyond any single performance, creating ripples of possibility that would touch other students, other families, other communities where hidden talents waited to be discovered and nurtured by teachers brave enough to see beyond surfaces to the music that lived in every human heart. The evening ended, but the music continued, in Emma's confident playing, in Nia's patient teaching, in Max's expanded understanding of what family could mean. It was a symphony of second chances, unexpected connections, and the revolutionary idea that everyone deserved the opportunity to share their gifts with the world. And in the quiet moments before sleep that night, as Emma practiced her violin in the room where fear had once lived, as Nia planned lessons in her own apartment for the first time in years, as Max listened to his daughter's music and smiled at how much joy had returned to their home, the echoes of that truth resonated through their lives. Sometimes the most beautiful music emerged when people were brave enough to see each other's worth, regardless of circumstances. Sometimes the most profound education happened when hearts were open to unexpected teachers. And sometimes the most lasting harmony was created when love transcended every boundary society tried to impose. The melody continued, spreading through the community like ripples on water, touching other lives, other families, other students who would learn that their voices mattered, that courage could be taught, and that the most extraordinary gifts often came from the most ordinary moments of human connection. It was the sound of transformation. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of music itself, democracy in action, beauty shared freely, the universal language that proved, note by note, that every life held infinite possibility for harmony. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.